Who is the most disgusting villain in American literature? If your answer is someone like Judge Holden, then you are most likely right, he is pretty disgusting. But do not sleep on my man the Governor. For the ones who don't know, the Governor is one of the main villains in The Walking Dead. And the majority of people who know The Walking Dead are probably familiar with the TV show and the games. But let me tell you, the comics are something completely different. Because while the TV show is based on the comic books, there were many things that had to be changed and watered down in comparison to the source material. For example, did you know that as the show was airing, they couldn't use the F word, and by that I mean fuck? You know, showing someone being decapitated, it's all fine, right? But saying the word fuck, now that's a big no-no. If you know the good old Governor in the TV show, you know that he was pretty despicable. But in his own way, he was a broken man. Perhaps even a dark mirror to Rick. A cautionary tale for him. Something he might become if he continues to descend into the darkness after the death of his wife. But at the end of the day, you almost feel sorry for the Governor. Especially in season 4 when he gets humanized through the Chambers family. Now, can you feel the same sentiment for the comic Governor?
No, not exactly.
In the comic books, the Governor first appears in issue 27, where he and his group of soldiers from Woodbury save Rick, Michonne, and Glenn. All of them exchange their stories, and from the start the Governor's group seems pretty normal. They're friendly with Rick's group, but the Governor keeps referring to them as strangers. And he tells them that they're lucky, as the night that they arrive, there is a fight going on in the Woodbury arena. The Governor explains that there are 2 people fighting in the arena surrounded by zombies, by walkers, roamers, biters, whatever you want to call them. The Governor explains that at first they had troubles with them, but the walkers became pretty tame after they started feeding them. Feeding them, you might ask, which is exactly what Rick asked. And what are they feeding them? Well, strangers. Right from the get-go, the Governor is revealed to be pretty fucked up. The next issue begins with the Governor basically trying to explain everything to them, and he tells them that basically if they try to do anything, they will shoot them right away. And he does not care if they live or die, he just doesn't like to be interrupted when he's speaking. Governor does not really try to portray himself as someone who is nuanced or good, like in the TV show where he tries to pretend that he's not completely insane. Here the writing is a lot edgier, which to be quite honest comes off as a bit nonsensical as to why would anyone even follow this guy. But anyway, the Governor asks Rick's group where they are from because they couldn't have been traveling all this time, they didn't even have water on them. And to prove his point that he means business, he chops off Rick's hand, which I really like this part, Rick losing his hand to the Governor, as from now on he will forever be missing his hand, except for a couple of panels later on in the series where he seems to have grown back his hand.
Your right hand comes off?
And I think this serves as a nice reminder to remember the Governor, as he's this first sort of big test for the survivors. I mean, he's responsible for the fall of the prison, which leads the group to travel even further. And after the Governor chops off Rick's hand, Michonne jumps him and bites off his ear. And remember this, because mutilating the Governor would be one of Michonne's favorite activities in the comic book. And quite frankly, I cannot even blame her. As this all transpires, the Governor brings Rick to the doctor in Woodbury, Dr. Stevens. So at the end of the day, it seems that the Governor actually cares whether they live or die.
I don't give a fuck. Alright, I do give a fuck.
Not that many things that come out of his mouth really make sense. After this all is done, the Governor then proceeds to visit Michonne in her cell. And long story short, he R-words her. He rapes her. This issue, issue 28, goes out of its way to show what kind of a monster the Governor is. And arguably that's not even the worst part. In this issue also the Governor has his little speech where he ponders about the walkers being really the same as humans. As he says, the walkers eat until there is nothing left, and the humans take everything they can and they are never satisfied. In the next issue there is a little scene of the Governor walking down the street where he tells 2 kids to basically listen to their mother. I find this so goofy as it is is such a blatant attempt to show how the governor actually rose to power. Like he's this great manipulator who keeps everything secret from his people. I don't really think that works for the comic books. In the show this was portrayed so much better, as we got a better look on the infrastructure of Woodbury there. The comic governor, because of his insanity and violent nature, just seems so incompetent as a leader. He then arrives at his apartment and he's greeted by his daughter, his undead daughter. And keep the daughter part in mind for later. He keeps her on the chain and he feeds her. And he even says that he attempted to eat human flesh himself, but he didn't like it. I guess we can add cannibalism on the list. And one of his men then brings him 2 decapitated heads, and also Rick's hand that he feeds to his daughter. He places the heads in the tanks, and then we get the famous scene of the governor looking at the heads. As he's looking at them, he says 57 channels and there's nothing on. I think that's another thing about the governor in the comic books. He's so unserious. I think this is a part of the author's Robert Kirkman's humor. When the scene happens in the TV show, he's quiet, which I think it's far more menacing. As he's done with that, he pays a visit to Glenn. Now, as a part of his torture, he makes him listen to Michonne getting raped. I think at this point, and this is heavily implied, he's not doing it to get what he wants, as he says. He's simply doing it because he likes torturing people. That's what he does, you know. Also, throughout the entirety of his first 3 issues since his first appearance, he basically has the same shit-eating grin on his face. Unless he's being like physically attacked, he's always constantly smiling. So again, he does not do this out of necessity, he does it because he enjoys it. Later on, he makes Michonne fight in the arena, and she ends up killing her opponent, who was a Woodbury soldier. The governor, he's not very happy about that. In fact, he's rather upset. I don't know if he really thought that this woman he repeatedly raped and tortured would just go along with anything he says.
Right, yeah, of course.
But I think trusting her was a bit of a mess up on his part. And to be honest, rereading this all for the video, seeing Michonne slowly getting her revenge, it felt kind of satisfying. Obviously killing Eugene, which was the name of the soldier, does not benefit her because she's still held captive in Woodbury. But she was filled with so much rage that she didn't care at that point. She wanted to make the governor angry. After that, there are a couple of Woodbury citizens being a bit upset about the display of death. Like there's this one woman complaining about how she took her sons to see this and now they saw someone dying. Motherfucker, you took your son to see a gladiator battle. You are at fault for this. After that, the governor finally decides to go and kill Michonne. While all this is happening, some of the people in Woodbury, namely Dr. Stevens, his assistant Alice, and Martinez, who is a soldier, they help Rick escape. Imagine my surprise when I realized some people in fact do not like being under the leadership of the governor. Michonne finds the governor feeding his daughter. The two then fight and Michonne ultimately prevails. And I really like this little detail. Michonne is beaten, tortured, and just fought in the arena. She still overpowers the governor, which the comic book portrays him as someone who is physically weak. I mean, sure, you can say that Michonne was not fighting fairly, as here she also bites the governor, but then again, the governor is also not someone who would be fighting fair and square. He never fights his battles, he just has people working for him, and he only picks battles that he knows he has a clear physical advantage. He thought he can take Michonne on, because she was beaten, tortured, and just fought in the arena, but he couldn't even take her. And I'm going to elaborate on this a bit later, but basically Michonne knocks out the governor, and she's about to torture him pretty badly. Basically, she uses any tool at her disposal on the governor. Only some bits of the torture are shown. For example, Michonne takes out the governor's nails and she then cuts off his entire arm. She also pokes out his eye with a spoon. Very soon they're discovered by the governor's men. One of them calls the governor Phil, as in Philip. And remember that this will also be important a bit later. And so before making her escape as a final act of her torture, Michonne cuts off the governor's dick like it's gone, it's completely useless now. She leaves him like this without ever knowing that if he died or no. Not sure what the point of all this was, if the point was that the revenge is bad or whatever, or revenge is good sometimes, because it's really hard to feel bad for the governor. Actually, most likely you are not going to feel bad for him because he kind of deserved all this. The only thing that Michonne did wrong was not killing him, as after this he will for sure seek revenge. Michonne did not really want to kill the governor there, she wanted to return and torture him even more. And this is something that was revealed in the deluxe edition in the cutting room floor section. At the end, when Rick asks Michonne if the governor is alive or if she killed him, she acts like she doesn't know what he's talking about. But originally she was supposed to say that she hopes he's not dead. However, with the version that we ended up having, it almost seems like Michonne is ashamed about what she did, as she doesn't want to talk about it and maybe she thinks she should have killed him. For some time the survivors live peacefully, as nothing really happens. They make the prison where they were living their home. The next time he appears is very unexpected, as it is a couple of issues later, at the very end when he is attacking the prison. It's also said that it's been 2 months since Rick and his group were in Woodbury. And after that we get flashbacks about what was happening in Woodbury during those 2 months. The governor gets patched up by this army medic called Bob Stuckey, who briefly appeared before as a homeless drunk man and sort of comes out of nowhere as this former army medic. However, in the books his story is built upon and he's actually one of the most interesting characters in the books, and I would even say in the franchise as a whole. He also appears in the TV show, but his story is vastly different. He has basically nothing in common with the Bob Stuckey in the comic books, except that they're both alcoholics. Sometime later the governor wakes up and he addresses his people. He uses his injuries to demonize the prison survivors and turns the entire town against them. And after that he does one of the most disgusting things we probably get to see in the comic book. He pulls out the teeth of his undead daughter and he kisses her on the lips. Not like a father would kiss his daughter, he just kisses her on the lips. It's pretty disgusting. When he's done and he's pulling away, there is some liquid on his mouth left. He vomits, but then he apologizes to his daughter that he will eventually get used to the taste. Robert Kirkman addressed this scene as something that was meant to show that the governor is the worst case scenario when it comes to the apocalypse. Someone who is too far gone. I think he got the point across even earlier, but whatever. From then on the governor just prepares for the battle, and they do fight for a while, but then the governor retreats. Michonne and Tyrese follow them, but Tyrese gets captured. Later they come back and the governor decapitates Tyrese in front of Rick's entire group. And then basically the bloodiest event in the comic book occurs. A portion of Rick's group, including Glenn, Maggie, Andrea, Dale and 2 kids, left right before, and they come back a bit later to help them, but they do not enter the prison. So basically everyone who was at the prison at the time, except for Rick and Carl and Michonne, just fucking dies. The Woodbury army, they kill everyone. The TV show version, they basically only killed Herschel instead of Tyrese. When we talk about the main characters, of course a lot of side characters died, but in the comic books everyone dies, and I'm not even like exaggerating. This includes Rick's wife Lori and their baby Judith, who get killed by Lily Call, character that appears very briefly in the comic books but ends up as being the protagonist in the novels. And she also ends up as the one killing the governor, as he made her kill a little baby, so she couldn't take it anymore and she just took out the governor himself. And that's it. That's how the reign of the governor came to an end.
This is it. This is how it ends.
But before I stop yapping about the governor, and to understand what makes him so fascinating, we need to go back to when the apocalypse first started and to look at the first novel, The Rise of the Governor. The Rise of the Governor follows a small group of survivors Philip Blake, his daughter Penny Blake, his brother Brian Blake, and their two friends Nick and Bobby. Philip is described as the younger brother, but the one who is far more competent than Brian. It's said that he was always the one protecting Brian against bullies, and he's the one who also managed to lead somewhat of a successful life. Despite his wife tragically dying, he took care of his daughter. Brian, on the other hand, he didn't have as much luck, as he attempted a few unsuccessful business endeavors, and his wife also left him. Throughout the book, Brian is only usually seen taking care of Penny, and it is heavily implied Philip only took it with him because he is his brother. As they travel trying to survive during the apocalypse, they proceed to change under the circumstances. Bobby dies pretty early on, and it is obvious that Philip is becoming a bit more violent. They encounter the Chalmers family, consisting of April, Tara, and their father David. This family is adapted in a TV show as the Chandler family, and they start out similarly to the book, but ultimately end up being their own characters. David died of a disease and turned into a zombie. He had his brains bashed in with a baseball bat by Philip. Philip and April end up forming a friendship, and she even becomes a mother figure to Penny. Long story short, this does not last very long because Philip ends up raping April, which results in Philip's group being kicked out. Philip's mental state continues to decline, and he completely spirals out of control when Penny gets killed by a group of bandits, which results with Philip capturing two of the bandits and torturing them, and also raping the woman, because of course that's what they do in this book. A friend of the brothers, Nick, who is still alive, discovers that, and he puts them out of their misery. Penny is kept alive as a walker, and Nick, he obviously notices that something is wrong with Philip. Eventually, however, they arrive at Woodbury, and Philip moves Penny in with him and Brian. Brian tells this to Nick, and they both hide away from Philip. They even witness Philip feeding body parts to his undead daughter. Eventually, they even see Philip kidnapping a young woman, and Nick sort of cannot take it anymore, and he decides to kill Philip, which he does. He kills Philip. In a fit of anger, Brian kills Nick. Sometime later, there is a meeting in the town hall. A group of National Guard soldiers are terrorizing the citizens of Woodbury, demanding they listen to everything they say. And their leader, Gin Gavin, ends up killing an older man when he tries to leave. And after this happens, Brian, who always relied on Philip for protection, has an epiphany. He asks himself, what would Philip do? And the way this is described, it almost seems like Brian is having an out-of-body experience. He's watching himself do what Philip would do, and he kills Gene Gavin and encourages the citizens to take out the rest of the soldiers. He gets approached by Martinez, who asks him his name, and Brian introduces himself as Philip Blake. So I guess we were adding identity theft to the list of crimes. The book recontextualizes the governor's character in an interesting way. It definitely elevates the character, but at the same time the big reveal did not really end up mattering at all. By the time the novel came out, the governor was already dead in the comic book. While there are other novels in the series that follow the Woodbury citizens, they aren't really focused on the governor as much, as Lily Call is the main character from that point. There is, however, one part in The Fall of the Governor Part 2, where the governor has a dream, and in this dream his friend Nick, who shot his brother, ends up shooting him. I think in a way this symbolizes the death of the Brian Blake persona. It is important to remember that the governor was never really meant to be redeemable. The comic book portrays him in this very pure evil light, while the books introduce the idea of identity crisis. Well, I think it is interesting to think that the governor his entire time was thinking in his head, what would Philip do before every decision that he made? I do not necessarily think it's the case. While the dream sequence portrays it as Nick Parsons killing Brian and only Philip being left, the way I like to think about it is, Nick kills both Philip and Brian. Brian Blake dies the moment the physical Philip Blake dies, as Brian could never make it on his own. So effectively being so dependent on his brother, his death also means the end of Brian. And that's when the idea of Philip Blake was born in Brian's head. He became Philip Blake. And in a way, the journey of Philip Blake begins in somewhat of a heroic light. He frees the citizens of Woodbury from the National Guard, which goes well with Brian's vision of Philip. He saw Philip as someone heroic because Philip always protected him. That's not necessarily who Philip was, but that's who Brian saw Philip as. It's not really clear what happened further down the line, because the next time we see him, it's through the eyes of Lily Cole, so he's not the center of the book, The Road to Woodbury, which is the second book. And it's also the book where the governor gains his nickname. And it's a very small exchange where basically someone says that Philip is like the governor of Woodbury, basically as a joke. But the way I like to think about it, Brian was basically running out of ideas of what Philip would do in certain situations. He also found himself enjoying violence, and I guess he didn't want this to be who Philip is. So while in front of the citizens presenting the Philip persona of someone who people could rely on, he also started crafting the governor persona, someone who operated in private. And through the governor, Brian could just dive into his complete insanity. And further down the line, he disassociates from the Philip persona and just completely becomes the governor. And after Michonne's torture, after the dream where he sees Nick killing him, the idea of Philip dies in Brian's head, and only the governor is left. Now he does not need to hide his violent tendencies. Sure, he still manipulates the people of Woodbury, but he can now excuse this violence by simply saying that the prison group is far more violent. I mean, just look at him, they've completely mutilated him. But that's just the way I see it. Apparently the governor is also one of the characters that the author Robert Kirkman regrets killing and he misses. I mean, he made like 4 books about him, so it's pretty evident. It'd be interesting to see what would happen if the governor survived the attack on the prison. Although I think it's really the perfect ending for him. And although I really only wanted to focus on the comic governor, I think it'd be in place to compare him to his TV show counterpart. In the show, the governor is played by the actor David Morrissey, although originally he was supposed to be played by the actor John Hawkes, who I think looks a lot more like the comic book governor than David. I think if he ended up portraying him, we would get the governor who would be a lot more accurate to the comic books, with at least with the looks. To be honest, I would not trade David Morrissey for anyone. I think he did a phenomenal job as the governor. In fact, to this day, I would say the governor is my favorite antagonist in the show. And I think as a character, he's far better than his comic book counterpart. First and foremost, he's a lot more tame than he is in the comics. He's also far more naturally charismatic, so him being followed by so many people of Woodbury does not seem far-fetched. Also, remember when I said in the comic books the governor usually is seen smiling after torturing people? In the TV show, he does not really do that. He does not chop off Rick's hand, and he does not rape Michonne, although he does sexually assault Maggie. And although Maggie says that he did not actually rape her, he definitely essayed her, which is still evil, but I think it's handled in a more tactful way than it was in the comic books. As I said before, the governor in the comic books shows us someone who is completely and utterly insane. The worst case scenario of what the apocalypse can do to a person. In the show, he's portrayed more as a broken man. Also, the scene of him looking at the fish tanks in the show feels a lot more menacing because he isn't joking around about it, and just overall he feels less cartoonish. He also does not kiss dead reanimated children who were a part of his family, which, you know, is always a plus. And overall, the scenes of him and Penny are more, you know, tragically sad rather than just being there for shock value. The most interesting change, though, in my opinion, is his identity. Although we never got a TV show adaptation of The Rise of the Governor, it is heavily implied that Philip Blake is actually who he is in the show. As in season 4, after he lost his people, after he lost Woodbury, the chapter with the Chalmers family from the book is adapted in the TV show. There he introduces himself as Brian Harriet, which is a name he saw written on a wall where this person named Brian was seen as a hero. And rather than disassociating from his original identity and basically gaslighting himself into thinking that he is someone else, here it is portrayed as something far more grounded. The governor is aware that he is not Brian Harriet, but he is trying to bury his past, to start again. And he almost succeeds, as he's seen genuinely caring for the family. Whereas in the book, the character of April Chalmers became sort of a mother figure to Philip's daughter. Here it is flipped, and Philip becomes a father figure to Lily's daughter, which Lily Chamberlain is the sort of the TV version of April, but she seems to be more of a fusion of April Chalmers and Lily Cole. I know it's a bit confusing, but that's just how it is. His beef with Michonne is also handled better in the show, as in the show they do not torture each other, but rather the governor sort of pushes away Michonne from Andrea, who was her close friend, but Michonne is distrustful of the governor, and she later finds the zombified Penny. The governor begs her not to kill her, but Michonne kills her anyway, and the two fight, and the governor ends up losing an eye. Unlike in the comic books, he does not lose an arm, a dick, and who knows what else. He only loses an eye. And just the overall drama between the characters feels a lot more natural. The thing I dislike the most about the governor storyline in the show is that at the end of season 3 he loses Woodbury, he basically goes crazy and starts killing his own soldiers, and then the prison group sort of accept the citizens of Woodbury in the prison. But in season 4 he ends up finding another group that sort of just lives in the woods. They are led by Martinez, who survived the governor's attack, and they also have a tank. It's just there. The governor kills Martinez and also this other guy, which somehow manages to go unsuspected, and he also manages to convince the people of this camp to go fight the prison group. And this whole thing is a bit contrived, of him finding another camp and convincing them to go fight Rick's group, even though they really have no beef with them. But I'm willing to look past that because I really enjoyed the governor's episodes and also him as a character. I think his death is also more fitting. He's stabbed in the chest by Michonne, which the two characters were always fighting each other, so it makes sense, and later shot in the head by Lily. It feels like in the show the governor genuinely tried to change himself, but ultimately when the past caught up with him, he ended up falling back to his old self. Rick even tried to convince him that whatever happened is in the past, and they can all live together, they don't need to fight anymore, which is something that was instilled to him by Herschel. But the governor rejects this and ends up killing Herschel. And Herschel, for the group and the show as a whole, was sort of a symbol of humanity, a moral compass. Someone who was a genuinely good person, which symbolically the governor also killed the remainders of his own humanity and ultimately proved that he is too far gone. Anyway, if you made it this far into the video, consider leaving a like. If you leave a like right now, I will literally enact a zombie apocalypse. And so you will be able to live out your governor fantasy, you sick fuck. I kinda revisited the franchise as a whole. I recently even made a video about Lily from the games, which thanks so much for the support. It did really well considering the size of my channel and everything. If anything else piques my interest in the franchise, I will maybe pick it up and also make a video on that. Let me know what aspect of The Walking Dead you think is interesting and you don't see people talking about in the comments. And also subscribe. This has been Leon, and hopefully I will see you next time.